Welcome back to another episode of Property Auction Hunters with your hosts, Jay and Safe today. Today we are joined by special guest, Rod Turner. Welcome, Rod.
Hi guys, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here today. So today we're talking all about the impact of what's going on in the political landscape with regards to now having a Labour government on business and in property in general. So Rod's going to tell us a bit about what's going on in terms of their decision making day to day, if that's changed anything, and also how the outlook of property and business in general in the UK economy and in the UK environment is going to be changing. So Rod, tell us first of all, I guess, so what have you got going on at the minute in terms of property side of things, developments, investments, and from a business point of view, and then also how is that going to impact things generally for you?
Yeah, so I mean, all of the above. We do developments and investments in property, commercial, resi, all over the country. In terms of how it's impacting us, I think the difference with this election is kind of everyone knew the result or had a strong inkling of what it was going to be for quite a while beforehand. So there weren't really any surprises there. And look, Labour are making all the right noises in terms of what they want for business and investment. I think it's the King's speech today, later this afternoon, where hopefully you might get a bit more information. But as always, the devil's in the details. So where they've kind of said, look, obviously every party says they want to build more houses. The key is how. How do you open up the planning system? Where do you find the labour from? Now, what they're talking about is that first point, opening up the planning system, making it a little bit more efficient. And some of the ways they're doing that is looking at the green belt, grey belt, brownfield, devolving some of the rights down to local authorities, getting back some of these targets as well. So they're all good things, I think, from our point of view. The key really is going to be in the how are they going to start to
execute.
Exactly, how are they going to execute that? And also, where's the Labour coming from that's going to be doing all this, which is the kind of the bit that contradicts some of their other policies in terms of closing up immigration and those kind of things, which they've said they're going to do as well, especially in terms of upskilling some of the labour force here in terms of retrofits and those sort of things. So I'm struggling to see what they're going to do, and I'll be interested to see the detail of that. But that will then impact how we go from there.
But let's just touch up on that point because, you know, a few years ago, there's a massive hype around modular, right? And modular is going to be this thing that, you know, reduces the amount of labour we necessarily need to get to the targets and all the rest of it. Then we kind of went through a phase where raised a lot of money, went through obviously investment cycles, and you saw a lot of them going to administration, close factories up. You know, you've seen a lot of housing associations use modular recently, which is pretty good. But is that going to be the solution, or is that going to be part of the solution?
Well, I don't think that's entirely right, because modular is more about kind of off-site construction, and you still need labour to build it. What it does is it reduces things like weather impacts and enhances quality control and speed and things like that. So I don't think it does reduce labour. It's just a different type of labour. And I think
isn't it more about the efficiency of the process? It's like an Amazon factory. You can reduce the labour workforce because you can automate a lot of it. So in these factories, is there a large part of it where you can have more efficient processes and things like that? I think,
yeah, efficiency comes down to cost as well. And I think that's where it struggled a little bit, because to get those in place, you need a lot of capital intensive costs and things like that. And also the uptake wasn't as big as some might have seen. And so it was difficult. I mean, we did modular schemes in 2014, which was fairly early on in kind of how it went on. And it was great. It was really good, but it was expensive to do. And if someone asked me the other day, how much had prices come down and how much had modular changed since then, my answer was not really at all. So it hasn't really come on, and I think that's where the sticking points have been. But in terms of kind of what we're doing now, it's encouraging to see a lot of, like, one of the biggest issues for us as developers has been the planning. It's taking years to get things through planning. So what that does is it affects how we can purchase or secure deals. And it really is difficult, because on the other end of a deal is a seller or a landowner, and you've got to get them comfortable with that structure, and you've got to manage those expectations. So we're all for anything that can make that planning system more efficient. One of the things I am a bit concerned about is the noise that Labour are making on affordable housing for developments. So a lot of talk about 50% affordable, which is great, and we'd love more affordable, but there needs to be something that encourages developers to do that. At the moment, we haven't seen the detail, but I'm not sure how that's going to work out. So I'll be interested to see that. That's still something that is kind of a concern. So where we had actually offered on an 86 unit scheme previously, on an option for an 86 unit scheme, and we've actually pulled back on that because now we're concerned about what the affordability is going to do. So we've tried to renegotiate it under kind of terms on the affordable side and the Section 106, because if it was to come back anywhere near 50% needs to be affordable, it wouldn't work for us. So it's a bit of a work in progress. And look, rhetoric's great, but until we see the details, we can't really do much. So there is an element of positivity, but we're not really pulling the trigger yet on some of those things.
This episode is sponsored by Roma Finance, a specialist bridging and development finance provider. If you've got a property that you've just bought or you're looking to buy and you're looking for specialist finance needs, click on the link in the description below now and they will take you all through the application process, which is a streamlined, seamless application process so you can get your funding as quickly as you need, especially if you're looking for them within 28 days.
So it almost feels like they've picked up a fairly warm room insofar as a lot of things that have changed, especially with permitted developments, have come in reflecting the need of society rather than the need of small high street businesses, right? So increasing that, making the large bulk of commercial properties, high street style things, Class E instead of A1, A2, A3 and B, whatever it is, and opening up that PD ability. There is the ability to repurpose buildings to create habitable spaces.
Well, there is, and I love PD. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's kind of a get out of jail free card for the government as well.
Yeah.
Because if you think about a planning application, and I think they said they're going to get 300 new planners in. I mean, that's not going to touch the sides.
No.
Because when you get a planning application, some of these are thousands of pages of documents for just one application, and you've got someone on the other side that needs to go through this. And when you look at kind of planning fees and how it all works, it's just not sustainable. It's not a sustainable model. Whereas if you can do more things through PD and make it very strict law and binary, you've either ticked that box or you haven't, that can open up a lot more. And I think it can save them a lot of work as well from the planning side.
Way more efficient.
So I'd like to see that. On your point about converting things to residential, yes, but there's a big caveat here, and it's about the cost of doing that. And in London, normally it can work, and in high value areas it can work, but in 60-70% of the landmass of the UK, it doesn't.
So this brings in, rather than just a conversation about commercial property conversion, it actually opens up the larger conversation about negative land values or negative property values, which is a large part of the problem. So you can look at the government saying we want to build 1.5 million houses over the next 5 years. You think, oh, that's a fantastic goal. Why not?
Well, it's only 30,000 more than they did last year every year, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
I live in Lincolnshire, and in Lincolnshire we've got probably some of the highest amount of negative land values in the country, probably apart from the northeast, in all honesty. But what they did was they brought in some really good schemes based on local government, right? So local council. So for example, they brought in a 25 grand grant scheme for grade 2 listed buildings and city centre buildings. If you convert that to a flat, each flat you get 25 grand's worth of grant. Now, yeah, okay, some people might abuse that, but in general, the concept of that is quite good to get people actually moving to build in these areas where it's not viable.
Absolutely, and that has massive knock-on effects for the whole local economy in terms of jobs and things like that, moving people into homes. So I think that's a really, really good idea. In terms of like the comment on negative land values, I think you're right. I mean, there's this myth going around that property goes up in value. Property doesn't. Property is a depreciating thing. Bricks and mortar depreciate. The steel, the tiles on your roof depreciate. They degrade. Land normally does go up, but it's dependent on your ability to put something there that doesn't cost more than it's worth. So it's very, very hard. If I go to, like, I don't know, like you said, the northeast and get a plot of land for £1, and then I've got to build a house on it, the building of that house might be 180 grand. But will I sell it for 180 grand? And well,
you see it on when you're doing your insurance, you're doing all your reinstatement values. I think 99 times out of 100 for us anyway, reinstatement values are way higher than what we're paying for the buildings or what they're even worth. So I think that kind of just goes to show you the reality of what's going on in the majority of the UK, bar the major cities, let's just say. I think the other problem with a lot of that kind of side of things as well is what is the, so say for example you take a 5-acre plot of land, the agricultural value might be £12,000 an acre, and the potentially, if it's close to a city, it might be £150,000 an acre or more. But in a lot of other areas, the agricultural value might be higher than the actual land value to build it necessarily.
Well, I think agriculture's kind of got some other rules with it in terms of kind of the inheritance side and the estate planning side, which Labour again may be changing. Hopefully, I hope they don't, because I think that would be a mistake. But if you put that into other kind of forms of use classes, I think you're absolutely right. It's a really difficult thing, the UK property market, because there are so many different micro markets that depend on different things. So. And this is why we have urbanisation. This is why we have so many more people living in and around the southeast, because developers are more encouraged to build there because they can make it work. It's hard to do it in these low value areas, and that's where local authorities need to come in, and there needs to be some funding for that, for house building there.
But there's going to be a couple of ideological headbutts here, right? Because 1.5 million homes need to be built under their own curfew that they put into place. The government isn't in a position to build out 1.5. So what they have to do is they have to rely on private developers. Now, ideologically, that's not the best approach. But if you take that single ideology and then you marry it up with the green scheme, how do you build 1.5 million houses ecologically without butting up against nutrient neutrality and phosphorus and all these other things? Where is there's a real pinch coming in there. I mean, open up the planning, do all these different types of things. That's amazing. Make PD easier, blah, 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 blah. You have the negative land values. Then you have the heavy reliance on the private development sector. And then you have the reliance on being able to deliver these things without polluting all of the waterways. Like, where do we sit? I'm not talking about an impossible task or an immovable object versus an unstoppable force, but there has to be a wiggle room somewhere. Well, where do you see that happening?
Well, look, you've hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of moving parts. And you've got to go top down and bottom up at the same time. So where you've got one of the things that Labour are talking about is these new garden cities. So what does that start with? It actually starts with infrastructure. And this is where more moving parts come in. And where does that start? The National Wealth Fund. Okay, bringing private investment in to go onto infrastructure projects. So I think those two things are great ideas. And with that then comes the private building environment. But also from the other end, we've got the the worst eco in terms of kind of our existing housing in the whole of Europe. We release the most carbon out of everyone, or the most energy. Sorry. So retrofitting is going to be massive if we want to do that side of things. And again, it comes back to the labour force.
I was about to say that where this all starts to really tumble down is who's going to do all of this stuff.
Yeah, and it's tricky. So one of the things they have started talking about is a lot of, and I can't remember what they're calling it, but they're talking about getting rid of the apprenticeship scheme and replacing it with something else, which is about upskilling existing workers, but also it's like a tax where companies will get to use part of that money on the equivalent of apprenticeships. Again, we need to kind of see the detail of it. So they are clearly thinking about that now, of how they're going to do it, because, like we said, it contradicts the whole other side of the immigration side.
And I think Brexit was a big blow for the workforce, let's be completely honest. But then on top of that, post-COVID as well, the inflationary environment is seen a lot of the salaries in between Europe and the UK starting to come very, very close to each other. When you factor in, it might be a Polish builder that's in the UK that's sending money back home. Actually, when you look at things are more expensive everywhere now, and actually they're getting paid a bit more in other European countries where they weren't getting paid as much pre-COVID as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's difficult to say whether something was good or bad because we haven't seen both forks in the road and the results of them. But I mean, in terms of immigration, we've had more immigration since Brexit. So why can't we get skilled workers from other nations that aren't in Europe? And as we've had more come through. So is it going to be a case of a visa system for skilled construction
That's
workers?
interesting.
Is it something like I don't know. But I think, look, it takes a lot of thinking from different elements of the government. And the problem with all these things is, do they actually talk to each other? Now, we got, is it Matthew Pennycock, I think it is, who's the housing minister. Now, the good thing is he's actually been involved as the shadow housing minister for, 3 years, which flies in the face of what we're used to, which is, 19 housing ministers in 5 years or something ridiculous like that.
So there's continuity there as well.
So he actually does know a little bit about it. So that kind of is giving me comfort as well. Because we've focused on development here, we haven't really talked about existing rentals or anything like that.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Because look, we've got a massive amount of empty homes sat in the UK. Let's be completely honest. And why can't you focus on trying to retrofit, like you said, and trying to bring them back into use? Now, the difficulty is going to be the kind of balance you're going to have between having a labour force that can do that, the cost of doing that as well, and then also some people don't need to do that, so they can just sit on their empty homes.
Well, and also some people don't want to live in those places.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to, look, local authorities need to look at a long-term budget here, because if they're going to be putting people into temporary accommodation because there's not enough homes, and actually that one could be retrofitted for 30-40 grand, it might be a cost-saving exercise to do that now. And it may be that the government opens up some new bond for retrofitting to borrow against for local authorities. If only they'd done that when money was a lot cheaper. But look, we could see that. Like I said,
borrow against future value. So
well, you just set up a green bond or a retrofitting bond, and you sell and you raise money for that. So.
Because councils have what I call shells on their books at the minute in terms of on their asset books. And what they're now doing is saying, right, well, let's sell this because we can't rent it as it is. We're going to have to put a whole load of CapEx costs into basically bringing this back into use.
Yeah.
But actually, I think councils should be looking at trying to buy stock. I know some of them are buying one-bed flats and stuff like that.
I think the difficulty is, in this country, we have a 4-year political landscape. And so everything is looking in that short term. And with housing, really, it needs to be a cross-party issue and a long-term issue, because it's a long-term asset class. It's a long-term kind of need. So there needs to be more of a kind of 10, 20, 30-year plan for that, because it does need an awful lot of investment, and parties aren't really willing to do that.
So to summarise, I guess from your perspective, Labour have come in, that's what the market expected, that's what the market got, pretty stable. I've seen some articles and sort of people saying they're pretty bullish over the next 3 or 4 years on the property market in general, in terms of being pretty stable and just having small marginal gains year on year, which actually is probably a good thing given the amount of increase in growth we've had over the COVID period. And you think from a business perspective, we're going to have to wait and see what happens, but generally everything's looking pretty positive.
I think, look, anytime you've got a fairly central government, things move in the right direction, and whether it's Labour, Conservative, whoever. And I think we've got a fairly central government. Whether house prices go up or down is going to be dependent on a lot of other factors. But in terms of, are we meeting the needs of people having homes, it's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think they've got any government's going to have their work cut out.
But that provides value for the current stock that we've got at the end of the day, because people don't have as many choices.
No. It could do, but that's not the defining factor, because that's a supply and demand issue. Yeah. Whereas actually, we know that the availability of credit is a big issue as well. Now, housing in the UK is in an awfully good position, in terms of, I don't know, I think there's about 7 or 8 trillion of value of residential housing, and there's about 1.5 trillion of debt. So we've got a very low loan to value. Compared that with kind of other times in 1989, 2008, and actually it's a really, really good thing. Does that mean that some people won't be struggling? No, of course not, because some people who are new into the market might have high leverage and their rates have gone up, and actually all the other costs of living are still high. So it's certainly going to be a struggle, but on the whole, as an asset class, it's in a decent position, but that doesn't mean that prices can't come down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. So yeah, Rod, thanks for joining us.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me.
Hopefully everyone's found value in that, and it just shapes a lot of the decision making for people moving forward. So yeah, thanks for that, Rod.
Brilliant.